From silent wounds to sacred wholeness, reclaiming the child within. There's a particular kind of emptiness that shadows us into our grown-up years. Not the peaceful quiet of contentment, but the hollow echo of something vital that went missing along the way. It's the strange sensation of sitting in a crowded room, yet feeling utterly alone, of achieving everything you thought you wanted, only to discover it doesn't touch the ache inside. This emptiness has a name, though we rarely speak it aloud. It's the ghost of a childhood that was never fully lived, never fully felt, never fully yours. Most people believe childhood is a phase we outgrow, like old clothes we eventually discard. But the truth runs deeper than this comfortable myth. Childhood doesn't simply end when we blow out 18 candles. It becomes woven into the fabric of who we are. Invisible threads that pull at our adult choices, our relationships, our deepest fears and desires. The child you once were doesn't disappear. They retreat into the shadows of your psyche, whispering through your need for approval, your fear of abandonment, your relentless pursuit of perfection. They speak through your inability to rest without guilt, your tendency to give until you're empty, your habit of minimizing your own needs while amplifying everyone else's. When we lose touch with this inner child, we don't just lose innocence, we lose our capacity for authentic joy, for play, for the kind of rest that actually restores us. We begin living entirely from our wounds, working harder and achieving more, desperately trying to earn the love and safety we never fully received. The architecture of adaptation. Every child is born with an innate blueprint for wholeness, but the world they enter begins shaping that blueprint from the very first breath. You didn't just learn your ABCs and how to tie your shoes in those early years. You learned something far more fundamental: who you needed to become in order to survive. If your emotions were met with impatience or dismissal, you learned to swallow them. If your needs were treated as burdens, you learned to become self-sufficient to the point of isolation. If love came with conditions, good grades, perfect behavior, never causing trouble, you learned to perform your worth rather than simply being worthy. These adaptations weren't character flaws, they were acts of profound intelligence. Your young mind did exactly what it needed to do to maintain connection with the people who held your very survival in their hands. But what saves us in childhood often imprisons us in adulthood. The responsible child becomes the adult who can't delegate, carrying everyone's burdens until they collapse from exhaustion. The quiet child becomes the adult who struggles to speak up for themselves, disappearing into the background of their own life. The entertaining child becomes the adult who's constantly performing, terrified that their authentic self won't be enough to keep people around. These patterns live in your nervous system like ancient software, running programs designed for a world that no longer exists. Your body learned to anticipate rejection, to brace for disappointment, to scan every interaction for signs of danger. And while this hypervigilance might have protected you then, it now keeps you from the very intimacy and peace you crave. When wounds become wisdom, understanding your lost childhood isn't about dwelling in victimhood or assigning blame. It's about developing compassion for the remarkable resilience you've already demonstrated. Every coping mechanism you developed, every wall you built, every mask you learned to wear was evidence of your determination to survive and find love, even in imperfect circumstances. Research in developmental psychology and attachment theory confirms what many of us feel intuitively. The emotional environment of our early years literally shapes our brain structure. Children raised in environments where emotions were inconsistent or dismissed develop nervous systems that are constantly preparing for threat, even when safety is present. This isn't pathology, it's adaptation. But recognizing it allows us to begin the sacred work of updating our internal software, teaching our nervous system that we're no longer little and powerless, that we can create the safety and love we once desperately needed from others. The triggers that feel disproportionate to present circumstances begin to make sense when viewed through this lens. That overwhelming feeling when someone doesn't respond to your text isn't just about today's silence, it's every time you felt ignored or forgotten as a child. All of those moments compressed into one present experience. The criticism that feels unbearable isn't just about the words being spoken now, it's the echo chamber of every time you were made to feel not good enough, multiplied and magnified by decades of similar wounds. The language of unfinished business. Your lost childhood speaks to you constantly, though not always in words. It communicates through your body's reactions, through patterns that repeat despite your best conscious efforts to change them. It's the inexplicable anxiety that rises when everything in your life is going well. It's the way you sabotage relationships, just when they're getting close. It's the voice that tells you you're too much or not enough, often in the same day. These aren't signs that you're broken, they're signs that you're unfinished. There are conversations that were never completed, emotions that were never fully felt, needs that were never adequately met. And until we turn toward these unfinished places with curiosity rather than judgment, they'll continue to run our lives from the shadows. Many adults spend decades trying to outrun this emptiness through achievement, relationships, substances, or endless busyness. But you cannot outwork a wound that needs to be witnessed. You cannot think your way out of feelings that were never allowed to be fully felt. The practice of self-reparenting, healing your lost childhood, begins with a revolutionary idea. You can become the parent you needed. This doesn't mean infantilizing yourself or living in the past. It means extending to yourself the care, patience, and unconditional love that every child deserves. Self-reparenting is about learning to speak to yourself with the same gentleness you'd offer a frightened child. When that familiar voice of self-criticism arises, instead of joining its chorus, you can pause and respond with curiosity. Of course you're scared. That makes perfect sense given what you've experienced. It's about giving yourself permission to have needs without apologizing for them, to feel emotions without immediately trying to fix or change them, to rest without earning it through productivity. It's about recognizing that the love you've been seeking in others' approval, others' presence, others' validation, can be cultivated within the relationship you have with yourself. This isn't selfish, it's essential. When you stop abandoning yourself in the ways you were once abandoned, you begin to show up differently in every relationship. You stop attracting people who mirror your wounds and start connecting with those who can meet your healed places. Reclaiming your right to feel. One of the most profound gifts you can give your inner child is the permission to feel everything they were never allowed to express. This might mean finally crying for losses you never properly grieved. It might mean allowing yourself to feel angry about injustices you were taught to minimize or accept. It might mean feeling the full weight of how much you missed, how much you had to give up, how much you had to become someone else in order to survive. This grief is sacred work. It's not self-pity, it's recognition. It's honoring the magnitude of what you endured and the prices you paid. As you allow these long-suppressed emotions to move through you, something beautiful begins to happen. The energy that was trapped in maintaining your protective walls becomes available for creativity, for joy, for genuine intimacy. Colors seem brighter, music touches you more deeply, simple pleasures become profound again. This is your innate capacity for wonder returning, the same quality that made you marvel at clouds and puddles and the way light danced on water. When you reclaim your right to feel, you reclaim your right to be amazed by life again. The generational legacy. As you do this work, you begin to understand something that can transform your entire relationship with your past. Your parents too were children once. They carried their own lost childhoods, their own silences, their own unmet needs. They passed down what they knew, even when what they knew wasn't enough. This understanding doesn't excuse harm or minimize pain, but it places it in a context that can free you from the endless loop of wondering why you weren't loved the way you needed. Sometimes the people who were supposed to teach us about love never learned it themselves. Forgiveness then becomes less about absolving others and more about freeing yourself from carrying their unhealed stories. It's about making a conscious choice not to repeat the patterns that were handed down to you, breaking cycles that may have been running through your family line for generations. The texture of healed living. When you begin to heal your relationship with your lost childhood, life starts to feel different in ways both subtle and profound. You stop living from scarcity, the fear that there's not enough love, not enough time, not enough of you to go around. You begin to trust that you can meet your own needs while still being generous with others. You discover that boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They're containers that allow love to flourish safely. You learn the difference between being alone and being lonely. Solitude becomes a refuge rather than a punishment. Your work becomes less about proving your worth and more about expressing your truth. You stop chasing approval and start following your genuine interests and values. You begin to understand that your sensitivity isn't a flaw to be fixed, but a gift to be honored. Rest stops feeling like laziness and starts feeling like wisdom. Play stops feeling frivolous and starts feeling essential. You give yourself permission to take up space, to have preferences, to change your mind, to be imperfect and still completely lovable. The ongoing conversation, healing your lost childhood, isn't a destination you arrive at and then get to check off your list. It's an ongoing conversation between your present self and your younger selves. Some days you feel incredibly integrated and whole. Other days, old wounds surface and need tending again. This isn't regression, it's the natural rhythm of healing. Like tending a garden, some seasons are about growth, others about pruning, others about simply maintaining what you've cultivated. Learning to move with these rhythms rather than fighting them is itself a form of self-compassion. You might find yourself drawn to activities that feed your sense of play and wonder: art, music, movement, time in nature. You might discover interests you had to abandon long ago, or find new ways to express parts of yourself that have been dormant. You might also find that relationships that once felt normal now feel draining or inauthentic. As you heal, your tolerance for dysfunction decreases and your capacity for genuine intimacy increases. This can be disorienting at first, but it's actually a sign that your inner compass is recalibrating toward health. The quiet revolution, perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this healing journey, is how it ripples outward into the world. When you stop abandoning yourself, you become less likely to abandon others. When you learn to hold space for your own difficult emotions, you become more capable of witnessing others' pain without trying to fix or flee from it. Children, especially, sense this change in you. They recognize someone who remembers what it's like to be small and vulnerable, someone who won't shame them for having big feelings or human needs. You become a safe harbor for the parts of others that still carry their own childhood wounds. Your healing becomes a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. You break cycles that might have continued for generations. You model what it looks like to treat oneself and others with fundamental dignity and care. Coming home to yourself. There may come a moment in this journey when you look in the mirror and see something you haven't seen in years. Your own eyes looking back at you with recognition and love. Not the performed love of achievement or the conditional love of being useful, but the simple, profound love of being known and accepted exactly as you are. In that moment, you might realize that the life you've been searching for wasn't hidden in someone else's approval or in some future version of yourself. It was always here, waiting for you to come home to the fullness of who you've always been beneath all the adaptations and armor. You begin to understand that your suffering was never punishment. It was invitation. It was life asking you to develop the very qualities you most needed: compassion, resilience, the ability to transform pain into wisdom. Every difficult experience was secretly preparing you for this reunion with yourself. The silence that heals, the silence that once felt like absence, begins to transform into presence. Instead of the hollow echo of something missing, it becomes the spacious quiet of someone who has learned to be at peace with themselves. It's no longer the silence of things left unsaid, but the silence of deep listening to yourself, to others, to the subtle rhythms of your own heart. This is the silence that contains everything: your history and your healing, your wounds and your wisdom, your humanity in all its beautiful complexity. It's the silence of someone who has stopped running from themselves and learned instead to rest in the truth of who they are. From this place of quiet wholeness, you begin to live not from your wounds but from your wisdom. You make choices based not on what you fear losing, but on what you're genuinely called to create. You love not from desperate need, but from genuine abundance. And perhaps most importantly, you finally give that lost child within you what they were always seeking: a safe place to exist, to feel, to dream, to be perfectly imperfect and completely cherished. You become the home you were always meant to find. The journey from brokenness to wholeness isn't about erasing your past or pretending it didn't matter. It's about integrating every piece of your story into a life that honors both what you've survived and what you're becoming. It's about transforming the very experiences that once diminished you into the foundation of your deepest strength and most authentic love. This is how healing happens, not by forgetting who you were, but by remembering who you've always been beneath the survival strategies and protective walls. It's a coming home that was worth every step of the long journey away.